so you do, like I was saying, there is a few things you want to have on hand. Like I have my painting in this wonderful little tray here, just to kind of contain the mess. You can have it on top of a plastic bag. You can have it on top of a garbage bag, a plastic tablecloth. I like to have white paper towel because I'm a paranoid person and I don't like having dirty gloves. So I usually like to clean off my gloves before I take them off because sometimes they splatter. If you don't have these things, it's not 100% necessary, but having somewhere to catch your paint is. You shouldn't get that dirty. So if you're like, how messy is this going to be? I always like to tell people, I'm like, if it's that nasty and you're getting that dirty, it's more of a you problem and not the painting problem. I'm just passing the buck. That's what it's coming down to. That's my disclaimer. It's a you thing, not the painting thing. So a couple things that you were given a pair of gloves. They are latex free, just in case anyone was curious. You do have a plastic cup. Your tacks there is some drill holes in the back. You want to make sure these are evenly pushed in because if you have one really drastically out, your painting will be on a tilt and it will constantly create a dragging effect, and your painting when you're done is going to go from going, oh my gosh, look at this, to go, what happened? I don't get it. And then it's like a sad moment. So it's like a meh. Now, I personally am going to be pouring my two paintings together because I'm just going to make one nice longer painting. If you're just like, I don't want that, I want it to be like, I have a place for it, you can do that too. But I don't know. I think it's artsy, kind of having a bigger space to kind of go on. If you're looking at your cup, there is a bunch of lines on there. So for this double pour, if you want to, it's always better to have more paint in your cup than less paint in your cup because it's easier to tilt it off than to go, oh, I should have put more paint in there, right? So if you go over any of the lines, that's okay. It's more if you're like, I'm supposed to have, all the way up to this nice next little smooth bit, but it's all gone. You want to make sure it's at least to that mark. I don't know, I can't remember how many people did red, but red is one of the harder colors to go with because if you put it anywhere but at the top of your paint order, so I'm just going to switch it like this so you can kind of more see. So my color orders is going to go like this. I always like to start, if you have a metallic in your group, I like to start with the metallic and then I'll go into my white. And then this is my first dominant, my accent, and then my second dominant. But if you have red anywhere in your cup, unless you're like, oh, I don't mind pink, you don't want to put it anywhere closer to the white because you are going to get pink. And most times people, when they like pink, they like red, they're like, ew, pink is gross. I don't want pink, right? Because you're thinking red. So that's why I went with these color choices. So I'm just going to give it a nice little roll here before I go in. Now, once I kind of start filling it, I won't be able to tilt my cup and kind of go like this because it will kind of fall out. So at the bottom of the cup, there is this nice smooth spot. I'm going to fill my gold to make it to the halfway of that smooth spot. When you get into it, it depends on what order and what color dominance you're going to want. So at this point, I'm just going to do mine. And then if you're like, oh, I want more of this blue instead of this blue, then that will make it the easiest. But for this one here, I have filled it halfway between the smooth part with the gold, and then my white is just going to go up to the second line. So I like to have my hand nice and high, because you want that paint to try to sink to the bottom of the cup. You don't want them just kind of pooled on top of each other. So I've made it to that first line here. So I have from the halfway mark to the first line. Now I like this brown. If anyone has the brown in their painting, it is not just brown, it is burnt umber, and it is wonderful. So usually at my public events, people always go, what color would you suggest? I'm like, oh, the burnt umber is wonderful. It's beautiful. It's like my favorite. So I do like a lot of burnt umber. If you're like, ew, I don't want so much burnt umber, then don't put so much burnt umber in yours. But this one is going to be about 3 spaces. So I'm always going by the lines in the cup because I find that's just the easiest to explain. So if I hold up my cup, I was at 1 line, I'm at 1, 2, 3 for my lines. Then I'm going to go in with my black. And again, my hand is always nice and high. I want that paint really, whoop, I went a little squeezy there. I want that paint to always kind of more sink to the bottom than to sit on top. So it's just nicely filling up my cup. You already start kind of seeing this design here. And then my red, if all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I accidentally put way too much of the other colors, I'll hit that line, and then if I'm like panic mode and I'm like, oh no, I want it to be a little bit more, I'd rather have more and tilt it off than to go, oh, I didn't have enough. So if I have my front view on, you can see that my cup is almost halfway because I wanted a little bit of extra red. It's halfway between the top of the cup and that smooth part again. Before my hands get really gross, I'm just gonna take a sip. So there's two types of people I always like to explain. There's the type of person that goes, oh, I love the cup just like this. Aw, I'm going to keep this. This is nice. Or there's the type of person that's like, okay. And they go like a speed demon. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. It's still going to look beautiful. But usually what happens is you'll lose your color over on this side. You'll lose it on the other side of your board. So it's really important that you're like pouring it out nice and slowly. So if I'm just going to show you here. When I'm pouring, this is where everyone gets all the questions. They're like, well, what if I pour it like this? I'm like, that's fine. And they're like, well, what if I do it like this? I'm like, that's fine. The only way you really don't want to pour your paint is by making a box on the outside. Because as soon as you make a box on the outside, what's going to happen is when you tilt it, you're going to lose half of your paint. So that is the most important, and I can't tell you how frustrating it is when I'm like looking over, I'm like, oh yeah, you made a box, okay. So I always like to kind of explain it. If you're a coffee drinker, if you like drinking pop, juices, wine, beer, whatever, you want to pour it like you're getting up in the morning, and you're not like oh hey, I need this coffee, and it's like slowly trickling out. You want to pour it like, oh my gosh, it's another work day, and you're pouring it a little bit more aggressively. That's the way I like to kind of picture it and explain it, because then people aren't like really scared tilting their paint. So to get into it, no matter how you pour it, you want it to be at least an inch away from any of your edges. So I'm just gonna take a deep breath, and I'm just gonna go like this, and I'm just gonna pour my paint on top of my board. And as you can see, I'm just going until my paint is nicely just used. Now, when it starts getting to these stringy bits, you see how it got really drastically thin? That's when I want to go, no way, I'm not using that paint, because it's going to look like little tadpoles floating through your painting, and then you're not going to like it so much. So this is the most important part of the painting, because obviously at this point you're going to start realizing there's like these little air bubbles in there. But if you can give them a little bit of time to like pop, this is where I always, at my event, I joke around. I'm like, this is a good time to just go, oh my gosh, I'm actually really good at this. But this is where I just kind of like let it sit for a little bit. And then I'll just kind of tilt both of them at the same time to spread out my paint. But I'm not treating this like an Etch-a-Sketch. I'm not shake and baking it. So you shouldn't be like like there should be no like crazy movements. Like you shouldn't feel like you're having a panic attack when you're doing this. So it's just slow, right? Like I just kind of try to teeter them at the same time. I don't even need to really pick them up too much. But the slower you go with it, the better your painting will be, because it's going to open up more. It's going to, be nicely timed out. But once I kind of get it where I'm like, okay, that has a good coverage between the two, I can pop them apart just like that. And so I'll slowly tilt each one at the same time, because if I want them to continuously run together, then I'm going to want to do it slowly. I don't want to just kind of like go boop, 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 done, right? So it's just a slow tilt. I always like to work from one opposite corner to the other, but you don't have to go straight for that corner. So I don't know if you guys remember like that fun little marble game you used to get from birthday parties, where you had to get like that little marble in that U shape. This is the marble and this is the U shape. I'm not going straight for that corner right off the start, because then you lose a lot more of your paint than you're kind of expecting to. So then I can just leave that guy for a little bit, let it sit, let it do its thing. because it's not a speed competition. It can be a competition, but you don't want it to be like, oh, I did that really quickly, now mine's the ugliest, and it's really sad. But these are a lot of fun because usually with this, like you don't like leave going, oh, I had the ugly one, you know. No one likes that feeling either. So I'm just slowly tilting it out. So I'm just slowly widening and stretching my paint. So since I got that one going there, now I can really start like moving this one a little bit more, not being so timid with it. So by the end of this, you will realize you do have extra paint. So if you're like, oh, that was lots of fun. If you have a spouse, a significant other, maybe a child, maybe a cat that feels artistic, you could always like, you know, put out some stuff for them to try to do it out with. Now, before you go overboard with the tilting, because you're like, oh my gosh, that wasn't enough paint, and you don't want to ruin your painting, right? So before you go overboard with it, it's really nice to put your painting down, really just like go, okay, this is looking really good. This is nice. But I will always go into my cup. So remember how I didn't use those stringy bits that look like tadpoles? When it starts getting to these stringy bits, you see how it got really drastically thin? That's when I want to go, no way, I'm not using that paint because it's going to look like little tadpoles. This is what I call the help me corners. So I can go in and I just slowly, you know, make a string of paint. I'm not making a pool of it. So I'm just making a little string here, you know, just kind of helping myself out, filling in any of these little bare spots. So it will grab the paint and gravitate it towards the rest of it. So I have that there. Make sure you don't accidentally string your dirty cup across, because if you love what you're doing and you're like, oh, Ellie, I just put this weird blob in there, it's a really sad moment. I can't tell you how sad it is. I've done it. I've done it with my hair. So as you can see, I do like to get my palm a little bit involved. And what that means is if I'm leaning towards, let me get that cup out of here. If I'm leaning towards this corner here and it starts to get like, I'm like, I really love what's happening, but it's making this loop, I actually just put my palm in it and I can actually pull the paint with my palm, and then it just kind of, so I don't have to drastically tilt so much. So once you really start feeling out your painting, you'll start to go, oh, you know, I haven't really got my edges. I will never ruin the top of my painting to get the edges of my painting. So I will not over tilt, and if I love this, I will not over tilt this to get my edge. I'd rather like scoop it into my messy little bit and kind of like scoop it up and go boop, 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 and kind of poke those little bits. Because when you really watch it come to life and it's your piece of art, you're like, oh, I don't want to wreck it. And it's, you know, your edges can always be painted a solid color afterward if you're really in love with it. I would never wreck what I have. So now I'm just going for those last little corners, making sure the whole top of my boards are painted. Just like this. And then when you're all said and done, you can put it the heck down. And if you want to like fart around with it just to make sure it lines up a little bit better, you can always do that because it's your painting, right? The more you're not scared to tilt, right? Like I wasn't getting so much stuff happening, but the more you're not scared to kind of tilt it off a bit, the more it opens up. These wonderful cells start coming through. You get some nice ribboning and lines and stuff like that. So it looks really cool when you're all said and done. But what you don't want to do, this is why I like having the white paper towel. People get really excited at the end and they start doing something like this and they go, oh my gosh, this is really great. And then they blob paint in the center of their painting. So I like to kind of go off to the side. You can even wipe off your gloves if you're a super paranoid person. But I just like to kind of do that, and just like that, my hands are clean. And then I'm just like, yay, my job's done, and now it's your turn to paint. So now I go like this, and yay!